hustle every single day. I'll be making moves till I'm buried in my grave. To the system, I don't wanna be a slave. I've been doing shit my way, or the highway.
The racial contract of property and the collective alternative. Capitalism in the United States cannot be disentangled from colonialism. At its core lies the juridical unit of property, which organized both land and labor into commodities and transformed them into the foundation of American political economy. This was not a neutral development. To turn land into property required the violent expropriation of indigenous territory, legally sanitized through doctrines like terra nullius and the Doctrine of Discovery. To make that land profitable required coerced labor, first and foremost the kidnapping and enslavement of Africans. Property in America was thus born in blood. Land theft on one side, human theft on the other. These processes were not incidental but mutually constitutive. Territorial expansion created the demand for enslaved labor. Enslaved labor made territorial expansion profitable. Together, they structured a racialized system of accumulation that became the DNA of U.S. capitalism. Over time, this structure was naturalized through race. Property rights defined insiders and outsiders, owners and owned, citizens and subhumans. The very capacity to possess was restricted to white settlers, while black and indigenous peoples were reduced to forms of property themselves. Property, then, was never merely a technical legal category. It was a racial technology, a way of allocating personhood, wealth, and belonging. Even after slavery's abolition, the racial contract of property endured. Jim Crow real estate codes, redlining, urban renewal, predatory lending, and gentrification all extended the same architecture of exclusion. To this day, property functions less as a universal right and more as a boundary. Who belongs, who accumulates, who decides. The racial psychology of property. The racial contract of property is not only a matter of legal codes or economic structures. It is also a matter of psychology and political identity. Here the insights of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and Joel Olson are essential. Dr. Welsing argued that white supremacy is not simply greed or prejudice but a survival strategy for a global minority. Caucasians, as a demographic minority worldwide, constructed systems of domination as a compensatory response to their insecurity. For Welsing, the obsession with control over land, labor, and wealth reveals a deeper anxiety about vulnerability and loss. Property in this sense is not just economic, it is existential. The need to possess, to exclude, to dominate is less about abundance and more about survival through control. Whiteness functions like a membership contract, granting insiders privileges, rights, and authority, while relegating outsiders to dispossession and subordination. The racial contract of property is therefore not a neutral system of ownership, but a racialized insiders' club. Property rights become the mechanism through which whiteness polices its boundaries, deciding who counts, who belongs, who accumulates, and who does not. Taken together, Welsing and Olson reveal that the behavior of the Caucasian in the history of U.S. property regimes has been defensive, rooted in the anxiety of being a global minority hoarding resources to stave off perceived vulnerability. Exclusionary, policing racial boundaries through property to ensure that whiteness remains synonymous with ownership. Colonial and repetitive, reenacting the same logic of expropriation across eras. Slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and gentrification are all iterations of the same compulsive pattern. Pathological, domination as a survival reflex, embedded so deeply that it masquerades as law, democracy, and freedom. This is the racial psychology of property, a compulsive survivalist obsession with possession, enacted through legal and economic systems that continually reproduce white advantage. To understand American capitalism without this racial dimension is to miss its very heart.
With every amount of progress Black folk have made in this country, we've been counteracted with this amazing, fierce opposition and regression.
I was going to say that reading your book was a reminder of how many people treat Black people succeeding as a problem that needs to be solved.
Well, you know, the best line I had in the book was white supremacy is defined as when you feel equality is oppression.
Yeah.
BIT's reorientation of property. The Black Infrastructure Trust, BIT, begins from the recognition that property, as historically constituted, is inseparable from racial hierarchy. To seek justice merely by demanding a fair share of property within this system is to remain trapped in the master's framework. BIT does not ask for inclusion into a broken model. It redefines property altogether. From exclusion to stewardship. Under racial capitalism, property is exclusion. Mine because not yours. Under BIT, property becomes stewardship. Land, housing, and infrastructure are not commodities to be speculated on, but resources to be held in trust for community use and future generations. From ownership to membership. Historically, property rights determined who could vote, who could belong, and who could build wealth. BIT substitutes ownership with membership. One person, one vote, one equal share of access to infrastructure. Belonging is not purchased or inherited. It is collective and participatory. From hierarchy to equity. Where property once degraded Black people into things, BIT elevates Black communities into proprietors of their own infrastructure. Things exist for people, not people for things.
Yeah.
Like, if you feel like equality is oppression, then that's the definition of white supremacy. That is what it is. And there are a lot of people in this country. I mean, you have to realize just the and we'll get into it as we go, but for every Reconstruction, just think about the counteraction against those periods of Reconstruction. Think about the fierce headwinds and how after those Reconstructions, there was a great deal of frustration, like I'm here today.
Yeah.
That you just sit in that frustration. So every amount of progress you make as a Black person in this country, you're met head on.
Accumulation to circulation. Capitalist property hoards wealth in private hands. BIT circulates it. The infrastructure produces value that continuously recycles within the community. Housing supports childcare, childcare sustains healthcare, healthcare stabilizes labor, labor feeds land. Wealth is measured not in extraction, but in the durability of shared well-being. How BIT rewrites property in practice. Housing, community land trusts, and cooperative ownership. BIT removes land from the speculative market and places it into community trusts. Housing is developed cooperatively so residents are not tenants in someone else's property but co-owners of their neighborhood. Equity is built collectively, preventing displacement and ensuring permanence. Healthcare, infrastructure held in common. Medical care is not tethered to private insurance or unstable employment. BIT pools resources to create member-owned clinics and wellness centers, where
But it is also just like, how do you, like, what do you do? You know, that's kind of the frustration that I think is evident in the
Well,
book.
I mean, I'm not too concerned about Black folk in terms of what do you do, because then it gets to the core and it gets to the root element of who we are. And there are three words in which I define Black people. And that's resilient, faithful, and then the other word is a little shaky as we get older and generations pass, but that's grace.
services are delivered according to need rather than profit. Health is treated as shared infrastructure, not a private commodity. Labor, valuing work as contribution. Where capitalism commodifies labor, BIT dignifies it. Every member's contribution, childcare, elder care, farming, cultural work, cooperative enterprise, is compensated. Labor is not coerced or undervalued, but understood as the living foundation of community survival. Land, return and renewal. BIT acknowledges that the original theft of Indigenous land remains unresolved. Through partnerships with Indigenous nations, land within the trust is stewarded for food sovereignty, housing, and cultural preservation. The soil itself is reclassified, not as a frontier to be claimed, but as a commons to be cared for. Liberation through infrastructure. If racial capitalism was built on expropriation and enslavement, BIT proposes a different architecture. One grounded in collective stewardship, democratic membership, communal equity, and circulation of value. Where the colonial property regime created insiders and outsiders, BIT insists, we are all insiders here. Liberation is not a redistribution of the master's house keys. It is the building of a new house, where property ceases to be the boundary of exclusion and becomes the infrastructure of belonging. The foundation of Black freedom is not ownership but stewardship, not possession but participation, not hierarchy but collective life.
Hope for this multicultural democracy, this experiment that is the United States.
I'm more concerned for Black men in this participatory democracy because I feel like we're getting left behind than any other group.